In 2013, I watched Pacific Rim in theaters and instantly fell in love with it. It had everything I wanted. Giant robots, giant monsters, giant robots punching giant monsters. I couldn't get enough of it and wished the movie had never ended and was still playing forever and ever. Yes, I am a well-adjusted and perfectly mature human being. But since this is impossible, I soon realized I would have to settle with sequels and spin-offs to satisfy my man-child thirst for more mecha action. I wanted comics, I wanted cartoons, sequels, everything under the pretense of exploring the universe of the movie, as if this guy's Tumblr blog counted as a universe. It's been 8 years, and you know what? I don't care anymore. Not that I don't like Pacific Rim, you've seen my review of it, I still love it, but maybe I've outgrown it in a way. Outgrown my childish obsession with it would be more accurate. Perhaps this wouldn't have been the case were the follow-up so bad and deficient of everything that made the original movie so special. But even before being hit by the quality of the rest of the franchise, I still had a hard time getting excited over it and whatever it might bring into the stage. This sentiment stemming mostly from the fact neither Guillermo del Toro nor Travis Bickle were involved in the franchise any longer. Since they were the reason the first installment was the masterpiece it turned out to be, you can see why anyone picking up the helm would have pretty big shoes to fill. You would think that all this talk about not caring about what lies in the future for Pacific Rim would lead into stating that I actually made an 180 after watching The Black on Netflix. Not really, this show only proves my prejudice against the state of this franchise. Just like with Godzilla Singular Point, I was far from excited to watch this. My biggest point of contention, which made me turn away from the trailer itself, again a well-adjusted and mature individual, was the visuals, especially the animation itself. I mean, this shit is computer generated, why is it so choppy? Was it supposed to mimic traditional animation? Because if that was the case, then why the animation gets so fluid all of a sudden in certain parts? It's jarring. I never had much of an opinion on those 3D animes, but from what I've seen so far, I get why people dislike them. It never looks quite as fleshed out as normal 3D animation, nor as pretty as traditional 2D animation. It's a boring middle-of-the-road alternative that, as far as I can tell, never makes anyone happy. To make matters worse, in this particular case the animation style isn't held very well by the bland character design. Granted, this is okay character design at worst, I admit, but when combined with the already weak style of animation, it makes everyone look straight out of a cutscene for a generic JRPG. This ties into what is my second biggest peeve with this show as a whole. Aesthetically, it looks like a second-grade Pacific Rim knockoff. Everything here looks and sounds like an uninspired attempt at replicating the looks and sounds of the original movie. When it comes to the music, it means you will often hear cues and riffs that are similar to the ones composed by Ramin Djawadi without being, in reality, the same cues and riffs. This is a little distracting as you would expect they to use Djawadi's original compositions instead of sound-alikes. I'm not sure if they would have to license the soundtrack from Warner or something and were not in the mood of having the majority of the cartoon soundtrack to be made of licensed music, which could and more likely would certainly make for one hell of a headache in the future. But still, not a single This is like going to a Beatles concert just to watch the monkeys. Visually, the show is no better either. The monsters and mechs designs hit the exact same strings as their older siblings from the franchise, but completely lack any distinguishing features that make them stand out among a dozen other Jaegers and Kaiju. Like, I get this is supposed to be a training Jaeger and was probably made bland and unappealing on purpose, not only to reflect its origins but also the character development of its pilot. Atlas Destroyer evolution from an unequipped training mech to a cripple unequipped training mech, and finally a somewhat armed mech reflects brothers Taylor and Haley's own process of learning to deal with their own failures and managing to stand up for themselves. But then again, if that was the case, why paint the whole thing in a tacky orange that not only makes zero practical sense in the context of the show, but also sticks out like a sore thumb next to other Jaegers of the franchise. The color scheme even undermines a little bit the symbolism of the red arm, which would work much better if it were to throw some color into a grey body. All of this also rings true for the Kaiju, who certainly look the part while lacking any characteristic that helps to differentiate them from what we've seen so far, basically being the cheap dollar store version of the creatures. The whole show looks like Dollar Store Pacific Rim in short, an uninspired and derivative take on something familiar and well established. But even if the visuals don't hold up, the story still might be entertaining, right? It has the kind of angst-filled narrative that plagues anime, and the worst part is that I can't even blame it on being an anime because the writers and showrunners are American. I don't know why the writers insisted on making this as bleak as it is. It's so unlike the tone of the movies. Not there isn't drama in it, it's just that the characters don't have to deal with the aftermath of bloodsheds that they happen to cause wherever they go. Ah yes, just what I wanted in Pacific Rim, more violence. If they wanted to add drama, they certainly could have done it without forcing so much over-the-top trauma down the characters' throats. I mean, come on. Where does a cold-blooded child assassin fit in Pacific Rim? Even the things that do fit in Pacific Rim take a turn that is either too dark or too much of a stretch to sit comfortably inside the franchise. The exploration of the universe mythos, the thing I so eagerly wanted to see in future installments, hits so far off the mark, it makes me enter in a sort of existential crisis, questioning if myself from 8 years ago would actually have liked this sort of stuff, and it's just that I've given up on the joy of seeing things like this, only holding into the original movie so hard because of an emotional attachment that refuses to go away. On the flip side, maybe I don't like all these new stupid ideas disposed before me, exactly because I refuse to let go of the familiarity of the first movie and consider everything new and bold an abomination. Excuse me, I need to consume my daily dose of monster energy. That's the stuff. Where was I? Yeah, the tiny kaiju are obviously in there just for the sake of some action scenes. All the other elements I won't get into because of spoilers feel more like half-assed attempts at building mysteries to keep the viewers coming back for more. Because God forbid we having to rely on relatable characters in engaging action to hold the audience.
Another reason to really hate the black.
You said it, kid. Even with pretty low expectations, I was still bummed by this show. I admit I may have exaggerated on the actual quality of it. While I stand by everything I said about its aesthetic, your mileage may vary on the plot of the cartoon, which some might find enduring. But as a fan of the franchise, it's impossible for me to not be at least mildly annoyed by the direction the franchise is heading with this new chapter, especially considering it strays further and further away from anything originally conceived by Del Toro and Beecham. Their names not even mentioned this time. Oh, but you have to give people a chance to try other stuff, you might say. Well, others had their chance, and they blew it up. I'm sorry, but most people just don't get it, and while we don't find someone who really gets it, this franchise is better off dead. Man, I hate doing negative reviews like this. Maybe I should watch the things I review before promising to do it. Next time is something I've watched beforehand.
Yo, Paraka,